Hey there. Welcome back to another peaceful evening together. Tonight's story begins in a quiet home where time doesn't rush and memories breathe softly, like the hush between the tick of a clock and the sigh of a distant wind. We'll sit with Thomas, now in his late 70s, as he prepares for something he does every year. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic. Just a quiet moment, a chair by the window, a cup of tea steeped in memory, and a worn photograph beside a closed window. Outside, the world moves, as it always has: cars passing, birds darting, wind brushing the curtains. But inside, time stretches into something softer. Every May 12th, Thomas remembers Lily. It's not grief that brings her back, not really. It's something quieter. A gentle wondering that never begged to be answered. A moment that never shattered, but simply paused, like a song left unfinished. Lily, with her laughter that curled like smoke and eyes that saw more than she said. Lily, who once promised to meet him under the elm tree, just behind the church on Loden Street. She said she'd come with news, college news. He said he'd wait. And he did. That was 61 years ago. The elm tree still stands. A little more gnarled, perhaps, but holding its ground like a sentinel of untold stories. He never asked why she didn't show, never dialed her number, never knocked on her door. Something about the silence felt sacred, as though filling it would rob it of its meaning. And over the decades, that silence became a place he returned to. A room inside his heart with a single chair and a view of the past. People often ask Thomas why he never married again after his wife passed, or why he seems to disappear each spring, just for a day. He offers them a soft smile. Not sadness, not secrecy. Just the quiet dignity of someone who has learned to live with mystery. He was 17 then. Lily, 17 and 3 months, which, she always teased, made her infinitely wiser. They met in the back corner of the local library, where Thomas dropped a worn copy of Neruda's love poems, and Lily raised an eyebrow, asking if he liked poetry or if the cover just matched his sweater. He laughed that uneven, surprised laugh of a boy caught off guard by charm. She walked out of the library with his heart before he realized he'd handed it over. They spent that summer tangled in days that felt too slow at the time, but vanished too quickly in hindsight. Long walks by the river, ice cream cones shared between bus rides, quiet hours reading side by side, pretending not to notice how often they glanced at each other. They didn't talk about forever, just tomorrow. And the next day, Lily dreamed of a university 2 states away, somewhere with wide halls and bell towers, she said, where the wind sounds like ideas. Thomas was going to stay. A job at the local newspaper was waiting. Maybe one day, a column with his name on it. Their lives weren't diverging due to conflict, just out of truth. So they made a plan. On May 12th, after all the college letters were in, she'd meet him under the elm tree at dusk. She'd tell him where she was going. He'd decide if he'd follow. If not, they'd write, call, visit. He brought a pen and a notebook that evening, and a little box, though he wasn't quite sure why. But she never came. The street lamp flickered on. The notebook stayed empty. The box stayed closed. And Thomas never opened either. Every May 12th since then, he performs the same quiet ritual. He brews the same tea she used to steal sips of, places the same photograph by the window, the one where they're both laughing, wind in their hair, as if life had no questions left to ask. He reads the same line from Neruda. Love is so short, forgetting is so long. And then he lets the silence wrap around him like a warm shawl. To some, it might seem like holding on. But to Thomas, it's not about clinging to the past. It's about honoring the space it still quietly occupies. A love not lost, just paused in a single moment under a tree that still remembers. Before we begin, if these stories bring you comfort, feel free to like the video and subscribe. And in the comments, tell me, is there something you still keep, not for its price, but for its story? Now, settle in. Let the hush of memory soften your breath. Let the warmth of a past, not fully lost, cradle you to sleep. And let's drift gently into a story, not about a missed call, but about how silence can hold a lifetime of sound. Thomas didn't keep much, not because he was a minimalist or believed in letting go, but because most things, in the end, faded on their own. Photos curled, letters yellowed, even voices once so vivid in memory blurred like mist on glass. Time has a way of tidying up the clutter, even if we never ask it to. But May 12th always brought everything back with startling clarity. On that day, memory sharpened, not in a painful way, more like light filtering through dust in a sunlit room, quiet, suspended, sacred. A soft beam of memory that warmed rather than burned. He woke up early, even now, not because he had plans, but because his body remembered. 61 years is long enough for a routine to carve itself into bone. He'd open the curtain slowly, let the light in gently. The tea kettle, old and slightly dented, would hiss just the way it did when Lily used to laugh at how he poured it too fast. One tea bag, one spoon of honey, no milk. He never changed it. Not once. There was a particular spot by the window where the light fell just right. That's where he sat, year after year. And beside him, always, a photograph of Lily that wasn't particularly flattering. Her hair was a mess. Her smile was crooked. She was squinting into the sun. But it was real. It was the last picture he took of her before the elm tree day. The edges of the photograph had softened with time, like the edges of the memory itself. He never showed it to anyone. Not because he was hiding it, but because it felt like it belonged to a conversation that was still unfinished. A story mid-sentence, a page that was never turned. The elm tree itself had changed. Where once it was the tallest on the hill, its branches now sagged slightly, as if age had made it listen more closely. The bench beneath it had been replaced twice, the first time by the town, the second time by Thomas himself. He carved a small heart into the wood that no one ever noticed. Or maybe they did, and just never said anything. Some things don't need words. He visited the tree early on that first May 12th, after she didn't show. He didn't know what he expected. A note, maybe. A letter tucked into the bark. Something cinematic. But there was nothing. Just the wind, a bird too busy to notice him, and the heavy sound of the world going on. It was strange how a moment so heavy could pass so quietly. Still, he sat. Not for long. Just enough to tell the elm that he came. That became the ritual. As the years passed, his life filled with other things. Work, marriage, children, bills, late nights, music lessons, clogged sinks, birthdays, arguments over silly things, laughter that rang too loud, mornings when everything made sense, and nights when nothing did. His wife, Ellen, was kind. She never asked too many questions. She once found the old photograph tucked into a book and simply placed it back where she found it. That was her way of understanding. Quiet acknowledgement. The kind that says, "I see this matters to you. That's enough." His kids, now grown, thought of May 12th as one of those dad days, like when he pulled out the record player or went walking at sunrise. They never asked much. They didn't need to. Sometimes love is knowing when not to ask. But for Thomas, the day was a kind of reunion, not just with Lily, but with himself, the version of him that believed love could be decided under a tree. That life changed with one conversation. That silence didn't mean goodbye. On that day, he was 17 again, waiting, wondering, hoping. He remembered the first time they met like it was stitched into the lining of his soul. The library had that particular stillness, the kind that made you whisper even when you were alone. Thomas had gone to return a book for his sister. He wasn't looking for anything. Then he saw Lily, on a stool, reaching for a book he didn't recognize. Her cardigan slipped off one shoulder, and she looked like she belonged in a painting. She noticed him staring, asked him if he was lost. He wasn't. Not until she smiled. They talked about books. Well, she talked. He listened, enchanted. She had opinions, strong ones about characters, endings, covers, even fonts. She said Austen was clever, but overquoted, that Poe was brilliant, but needed sunlight. She said if a story didn't make her cry at least once, it wasn't worth finishing. He didn't understand half of what she said, but he wanted to hear every word. By next Thursday, they will have their table at the diner. She always ordered pie. He always forgot to bring enough money, and she always pretended not to notice. By the next month, their names were carved into the back of a park bench, which has long since been replaced. And by the end of summer, they had made that promise May 12th, under the elm. He could still see her on that last day they were together. Her hair in a braid, a ribbon around her wrist, the color of forget-me-nots. She was excited, practically vibrating with news. But she said she wanted to wait until the 12th to tell him. "It'll mean more than," she said. "Everything will mean more." And so he waited. Each year, as Thomas steeped his tea, unfolded the same old chair by the window, and opened that fading notebook, the one that never got written in, he would let the memories play. Like soft music. Not to understand, not to solve anything, just to feel them again. What lingered wasn't the pain of her absence. It was the beauty of all the little moments before. The way she always counted the stars out loud. The way she hummed when she was thinking. The way she touched the back of his neck when she wanted him to stop worrying. Those were the things time hadn't taken. They lived inside him, unchanged by age. He never tried to look her up. Never searched her name. Something about that felt too final, too factual. As if knowing where she went would break the fragile magic of not knowing. Mystery, after all, was its own kind of companionship. And so, as May 12th began again, Thomas found himself smiling. Not because he had answers, but because he had stories. And that was enough. Hey, were never dramatic about their love. That wasn't their way. Thomas and Lily existed in the in-betweens, in glances across a diner booth, in the shared silence of library corners. In the slow walk home after a movie, where neither spoke because the sound of their shoes on pavement said enough. There was no grand declaration, no fireworks, just a quiet unfolding. Summer crept in gently that year, the kind of summer where days melt together and time slows to a pace that only youth can bear. The kind of summer that soaks into skin and memory without asking. And during that summer, Thomas began to learn Lily's rhythms, the way she tapped her fingers when she was excited, how she always ordered a second spoon with her dessert, even if she was alone, just in case someone joined her. They would sit by the river for hours, watching the ripples catch the light. Lily believed water remembered things, that every stream carried secrets from the places it passed. Thomas didn't argue. He liked the way she said it. Like everything had meaning if you looked closely enough. She believed in signs, that a red bird meant good news, and that if you found a feather on a windy day, someone missed you. Thomas started noticing feathers more. One afternoon, they found a turtle trying to cross the road. Lily picked it up and carried it to the other side, then gave it a lecture about looking both ways. Thomas watched her kneel in the grass, completely serious, and realized in that moment that he would follow her anywhere, even if it was just to the other side of a road. She collected postcards but never mailed them. Each one was from a place she wanted to see, written with messages she imagined she might send. "This one's from Paris," she told him once. "I haven't been yet, but I already miss the coffee." She gave that one to him. But the future was creeping in, as it always does. College brochures, letters from admissions offices, conversations with guidance counselors who talked about potential and next steps. Lily was excited. She wanted a place where she could disappear into knowledge, where nobody knew her yet, where she could become whatever she wanted. Thomas understood, but he was afraid of being left behind. He started reading the books she liked, tried to understand her language. He underlined lines in her favorite poetry collection. He even bought a map and circled the cities where her dream schools were. He told himself he was being supportive, but in truth, he was trying to draw closer to something he didn't know how to hold on to. She told him one evening, while they lay on the hood of his car, watching for shooting stars, that she had narrowed it down to 2 schools, both far, one farther than the other. "I'll tell you on the 12th, she said, "and if you want to come with me, we'll figure it out. If not, we'll write letters." He nodded. He always nodded when she made decisions. It wasn't that he didn't have opinions, it's just that hers always made more sense. He started writing her a letter the next day. He didn't know what he'd say. It wasn't a love letter, not exactly. More like a letter of promises. He wanted to give her reasons to stay, or at least to let him go with her. But he never finished it. He kept revising the beginning. "Dear Lily," he wrote, then scratched it out, then wrote it again. She asked him once if he believed in fate. He said no. She said good. "Fate is lazy," she told him. "I want to believe that we choose, that we get to decide what matters, that we get to make things happen." She believed life should be written, not received. Thomas never forgot that. And maybe that's why, when she didn't show, he didn't go looking for an answer. He figured that was her choice. One she had the right to make. Even if it broke something quietly inside him. They had their places: the bookstore on Maple, the coffee shop that served hot chocolate with whipped cream shaped like animals, the bench by the duck pond, where she once made him read his own writing aloud and then cried when he finished. She told him she cried because it was true, not because it was sad. She made him a better version of himself, not through pressure, just through presence. She asked the right questions, laughed at the wrong moments, believed he was capable of more than he dared to believe himself. That kind of love leaves a mark. He remembered the last week before May 12th. They were restless, both of them. Too much unsaid. Too many what-ifs. She seemed distant, then too close, then distant again. He tried to joke. She smiled but didn't laugh. "You'll be there, right?" she asked him that Friday. "Under the elm?" He nodded. Of course he would. Always. He cleaned his shoes for that day, bought a new pen, even put on cologne, which he rarely used. He practiced how he'd tell her he wanted to go with her, that he wasn't afraid anymore, that he'd figure it out. He arrived early, of course. Saturday on the bench. Waited. Listened to the birds. Watched a squirrel dart across the grass and imagined it was nervous for him. The sun began to dip. Shadows grew long. The breeze shifted. He waited. And then the waiting turned into something else. A stillness he didn't understand. A quiet that felt heavier than the trees. He left after an hour. Walked home slowly. Saturday on his porch and looked at the stars they used to count together. The letter was in his pocket. It stayed there for weeks. The map he marked with her school stayed folded in his desk. The postcard from Paris remained by his bedside. He never mailed the letter, never tore it up, just tucked it into a book and slid it back on the shelf. Some loves aren't meant to end. They just stop appearing in the places you expect. And yet, they never really leave. May 12th arrived with the kind of light that makes everything look a little golden, a little softer around the edges, the kind of morning that feels like a promise. The kind of morning you remember even before anything happens. Thomas remembered dressing slowly that day. He took care with each button on his shirt, each fold in his pants. He even polished his shoes, something he hadn't done since his sister's wedding. There was a kind of sacredness to it, as if preparing for a ceremony no one else could see. He left the house early, not because he needed to, but because staying still made his nerves louder. The streets were unusually quiet. Spring had touched every branch, and the scent of lilacs floated through the neighborhood like an old song. He carried a small notebook in his coat pocket, and the letter now rewritten and folded perfectly, just in case. The bench under the elm looked the same as always. Its wooden slats had a slight wobble, the right armrest worn smooth from decades of use. It faced west, so as the sun dipped lower, the shadows of the tree's branches would stretch like long fingers across the grass. He sat down, breathed in, waited. He watched a family walk by parents holding the hands of a giggling toddler. A dog barked in the distance. A cyclist zoomed past, too fast to see the boy on the bench with the too carefully combed hair. Time passed in that peculiar way it does when you're waiting. Every second stretched. Each minute lingered a little too long. He checked the sky, checked the path, adjusted his collar, smoothed his hair again. The breeze picked up, rustling the leaves. A few began to fall early, twirling as they descended. He thought that was a good sign. A kind of gentle drama, nature's stage. Then the church bells rang 6 times. Still no Lily. He smiled at first. She was late sometimes. Not often, but it happened. He liked that about her, that she wasn't bound to the strictness of the clock. She moved on feeling. If she was late, it meant she was somewhere meaningful, caught in something beautiful. But the sky darkened. 7 bells. 8. The street lamps began to flicker on, one by one. The orange hue cast long, strange shadows on the ground. The temperature dropped slightly. He shivered. Not from cold, but from something he couldn't quite name. He looked down at his hands. Clenched, then open, then clenched again. At 8:23 p.m., Thomas stood up, slowly, as if lifting the weight of the moment off his chest. He placed the letter on the bench, not under a rock, not in an envelope, just the folded page, plain and exposed. He walked away without looking back. The next morning, it was gone. He never knew if someone had taken it, if the wind carried it away, if Lily came after all, in the middle of the night, and read it in silence. He would never know. He let those possibilities live in him. Not as a way to deny the truth, but as a way to honor the depth of what they'd shared. Sometimes, he thought she must have had a reason. Other times, he wondered if she'd simply chosen something else. And that, too, was fair. He talked about her only once to his son, who asked, years later, if Thomas had ever had a first love. Thomas said yes. That was all. His son didn't press. Maybe he saw something in his father's face that told him the answer wasn't a story but a silence. People asked him, once or twice, if he ever found love again. He said yes. And it was true. He had a good marriage, full of respect and patience. A steady love, a safe place. But he never denied that part of him still sat on that bench, still held that letter, still waited for a girl who believed water remembered. Some years, May 12th came and went with ease. Other times, it hurt in a quiet, familiar way, like a song that always plays a bit too softly to turn off. A tune that returns when the window is open just the right amount. And always, there was the bench, the elm, the tea, the silence. That day didn't haunt him. It held him, like a photograph in an old album, tucked between pages, not because it had to be remembered, but because it never really left. And in a way, it never did. Thomas didn't talk about the elm tree again, not to his friends, not to his family, and not even to himself. He folded the memory into a quiet place inside him, not out of shame or sadness, but out of reverence. Some stories, he believed, lived better in silence. And this one? It was sacred in its stillness. Life, as it tends to do, continued. He got the job at the local paper. It started with delivering obituaries and church notices, but over time he wrote human interest stories, the kind about neighbors helping neighbors, or a dog that found its way home after 3 years. He found he liked telling other people's stories more than his own. His columns were warm, thoughtful, sprinkled with quiet humor and unexpected kindness. People clipped them from the paper and tucked them into drawers. He met Ellen at a bookstore 2 winters after May 12th. She wasn't Lily. She didn't ask strange questions or believe in the emotional memory of water. She didn't collect postcards or talk about stars. But she was kind, and she listened without trying to fix anything. She had a laugh that started small and then took over a room. When she smiled, it was like sitting near a fireplace. Not exciting, but warm. And that warmth, over time, became something he could trust. They married in the fall. The ceremony was simple. A few close friends, his brother as best man, Ellen's niece holding her bouquet upside down. They laughed through most of the vows, and afterward, they drove to the coast and watched the waves roll in until the stars came out. He remembered thinking, not for the first time, that love didn't always have to feel like fire sometimes. It could feel like a blanket. Their life together was quiet and steady. 2 kids, a house with a fence that always needed painting, vacations to national parks, board games during thunderstorms, Saturday morning pancakes. The kind of life built not on passion, but on presence. And in its own way, it was beautiful. Ellen was the kind of woman who noticed the small things, who picked up his favorite gum without asking, who refilled the bird feeder before he could get to it. She didn't pry into his silences. She understood that some parts of a person remain untouched, and that to love someone was to respect the parts they never spoke of. Every May 12th, Thomas would rise early, brew his tea, sit by the window. Ellen never asked. She simply gave him space. Once, she left a small pastry next to his mug with a note. "For whatever today means to you." That was the most she ever said about it. And he loved her more for that than for any grand gesture. Years passed in the way years do slowly. Then, all at once, his children grew. One became a teacher, the other a nurse. They called on Sundays, sent photos of birthdays and report cards and summer trips. Thomas framed the ones with messy handwriting and drawings of stick figures holding hands. He kept them next to that same photograph of Lily, not because they were the same, but because they both mattered. They were pieces of him, stitched into his life in different ways. He never tried to forget Lily. He didn't need to. Her memory didn't ache. It simply lingered, like the smell of old books, or the way certain songs make you stare out the window without realizing. She wasn't a shadow or a ghost, more like a footnote in every chapter. Quiet, persistent, never erased. There were days when he'd walk past the bookstore where they used to sit and read, or past the bench by the duck pond and feel something flutter in his chest. But it wasn't regret. It was more like recognition, as if some part of him still lived there, as if the boy who waited under the elm still whispered through the wind. He and Ellen grew older together. Their routines softened with age. Evenings became earlier, meals simpler. He read aloud to her as her eyesight faded, and she hummed when he had trouble falling asleep. When she passed, it was gentle, like a candle quietly going out. He held her hand and thanked her, not for any one thing, but for everything. Grief came, but not in waves. It came like fog, quiet, uninvited, and hard to explain. He missed her in the ways that crept into daily life, the 2 cups on the counter, the half-finished crossword puzzle, the way the house sounded too quiet after dusk. One spring, he found the old letter again, the one he had left on the bench. A second copy, folded into an old poetry book. He didn't remember making it, but there it was. The handwriting was messier than he remembered, the words simpler, but the feeling remained. He didn't read it all the way through, just the first line. "If you don't come, I'll understand, but I'll still be here." He smiled, folded it back, and placed it between the pages once more. Sometimes he wondered what she would have thought of his life, of Ellen, of his children, of the quiet dignity he carried. He imagined her smiling, maybe, saying something cryptic and wise, then laughing at her own mystery. He never found out what happened to her, never searched her name. He could have, in later years, but something always held him back. A quiet agreement, perhaps a pact made in the silence under the elm. And so he lived, fully, softly, completely. Each May 12th, the past returned not to haunt, but to greet him. A gentle nod from the boy he once was, and from the girl who never said goodbye. Thomas was 83 the last time he walked to the elm tree. His knees ached more than usual, and he moved slower than he liked. But his grip on the cane was steady, and his eyes, though a little clouded now, still knew every crack in the sidewalk. The route hadn't changed. Left at the corner with the postbox, past the bakery with the chipped window, across the street, where the lamppost leaned slightly, always favoring the west. May 12th had arrived quietly that year, like a letter slipped under a door. The sun was soft, the wind patient. Spring was in no rush. He had almost decided not to go. The bench could wait, he told himself. The tree wasn't going anywhere. He could sit by the window instead, drink his tea, and remember, as he always did. But something inside him, something gentle, something persistent, told him this visit mattered. Not because anything would be different, but this time, he wanted to say something out loud. The walk took twice as long as it used to. He stopped once to rest on a stranger's garden wall. A robin hopped near his foot, tilted its head as if listening. "I'm still here," he whispered to it. The bird blinked, flew off. He passed the old bookstore, now closed and turned into a flower shop, the park where he used to read aloud to Ellen. Everything felt both familiar and foreign, like walking through a dream stitched from real places. By the time he reached the elm, the sky had shifted into that golden stretch between afternoon and evening. The tree stood as it always had, sturdy, knowing, unchanged, and yet older. The bench beneath it had been repainted, but his carved heart was still faintly visible beneath the grain. Time had softened it, not erased it. Thomas sat, slowly, exhaled. The air was different here, thicker with memory. The breeze didn't just pass, it lingered. He ran his fingers along the bench, closed his eyes. "Hi, Lily," he said. It was the first time he'd spoken her name aloud in years. He smiled. Not because it felt dramatic, but because it felt like coming home. He didn't know what he expected to feel. Relief? Sadness? Peace? What he felt was closeness, as if she were near. "I thought maybe you'd show up that night," he said quietly. "Maybe you did. Maybe you saw me and just couldn't." The wind stirred. "I'm not angry. I never was. I think I just missed you. That's all." He looked up into the branches, at the way the leaves danced gently. The light made them glow from within. "I had a good life," he continued. "You should know that. Ellen was wonderful. The kids, too. I told stories, like I always wanted. Laughed a lot, grew old without too many complaints." He paused. "But I never stopped remembering you. Not once. Not even in the quietest corners of my mind." He thought of how Lily had changed him, not with her presence, but with her absence. How her silence taught him to listen. How her vanishing shaped the way he stayed. He remembered how she smelled like rain and mint. How her handwriting curled at the edges. How her laugh always came a second late, like she was giving the world a moment to catch up. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the letter. The original worn now, the fold soft and permanent. He laid it beside him on the bench. "I never needed answers," he said, "just the memory." He thought of all the things he never said, all the questions he never asked, not out of fear, but because sometimes wondering is enough. Sometimes the unknown is its own kind of comfort. The sun dipped lower. He stayed seated, watching the sky change colors, from gold to amber to a soft kind of gray that looked like the inside of a dream. He wasn't sad, not in the way people expect. He was full of years, of memories, of a love that once was and a life that came after. He whispered stories into the wind. Small things, like how his grandson drew a picture of a tree and called it Grandpa's thinking spot, or how Ellen used to hum the same tune Lily once did, without ever knowing, or how every May 12th he felt a little more whole by letting something go. He stood, slower than before, and looked back one last time. The bench, the tree, the letter. He didn't take it with him. This time, he left it for good. A breeze lifted the corner of the page. It didn't fly away. It just shifted, as if the tree was reading it. He smiled. "Good night, Lily." And with that, he turned. The walk home was longer, but lighter. The house was quiet when Thomas returned. He placed his cane gently by the door, hung his coat on the same hook it had always known, and turned on the lamp in the living room a warm amber glow that filled the space without crowding it. He made tea. 1 tea bag, 1 spoon of honey, no milk. The steam curled into the air like a familiar melody, and he sat by the window, just as he had every May 12th for more than 6 decades. Outside, the stars had begun to wake, one by one, small and patient. The night moved slowly, as if honoring his pace. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen, to memory, to silence, to something in between. The bench was behind him now, but its presence lingered not as a loss, not as a weight, but as a warmth. A story that had finally breathed its last word, not in sadness, but in peace. He thought of Lily and Ellen and all the voices and faces that made up the long, soft journey of his life. People he loved, people he lost, people who came and stayed, and those who passed through just long enough to leave a mark. He thought of love, not the kind that burns bright and fast, but the kind that hums quietly in the background, like a song you didn't know you knew all the words to. The kind that lasts, not because it's perfect, but because it becomes part of you. He smiled, and in that stillness, something settled. Not an answer, but enough. There's something tender about reaching the end of a memory. It doesn't disappear. It just becomes quieter, less urgent. Like a gentle tide rolling back into the sea, leaving traces in the sand that say, yes, this happened. If you're still awake, feel free to let your breath fall into rhythm with the night. Let your memories, soft as they are, keep you company in the quiet hours. There is nothing more to do. No questions to answer. No places to go. Just rest. And maybe, as you drift, you'll think of someone, a person, a place, a moment, not because it needs to return, but because it still gently exists within you. That is the magic of stories. They don't fade. they find their way home. So let go, just a little. Sink into the stillness. Let the story wrap around you like a familiar blanket. And sleep well. If these stories bring you comfort, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more. In the comments, tell me, is there someone or something you still think of, not to change the past, but just to keep it company? Good night, and thank you for sitting with me.